A man who owned more buildings than he could remember the names of stood inside a dry cleaner the size of a one-car garage. And for the first time in years, he was holding his breath. It was a Tuesday in late October. Cleveland. The rain had been coming down since before sunrise, the slow gray kind that gets into the seams of the city and stays there. On a narrow stretch of Lorraine Avenue, between a check-cashing place with bars on the windows and a storefront church that only opened on Sundays, there was a little shop with a hand-painted sign that read Mathis Cleaners. The paint had faded so much that the letters looked like a memory of themselves. Inside that shop, behind a counter worn smooth by 40 years of elbows, a woman named Ruth Calloway was handing a freshly pressed jacket back to a tall man in a plain wool coat. And tucked inside the breast pocket of that jacket was a small folded note, written in her neat, careful hand, and a thick envelope of money that did not belong to her, that no one in the world knew about but her, and that she had every reason to keep. She gave it back anyway. She did not know that the man taking the jacket from her hands could have bought the entire block they were standing on, and never felt it leave his account. She did not know that the jacket itself had belonged to a dead man. And she did not know that the few words she had written on that little folded note were about to reach down into that quiet man's chest and open a door he had kept locked for almost 30 years. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why a folded note could undo a man worth more than most towns, you have to understand both of them. You have to understand the world he came from, and the world she was barely holding on to. So let me take you back, not far, just 5 days. Let me start with the man. His name was Denzel Washington. Not the kind of name that turned heads in the neighborhoods he liked to spend his time in, because the people there did not expect a man worth that much to be standing in line at a corner diner ordering eggs and rye toast like everybody else. And that was exactly how he liked it. He was 61 years old. He had a full head of gray hair that he cut himself with clippers, because he could not stand sitting still long enough for a barber. He drove an 11-year-old sedan with a small dent in the rear door that he had never bothered to fix. He owned exactly 4 suits, and he wore the same brown leather watch his entire adult life, a watch that had cost $40 when he bought it and was worth nothing now except to him. What Denzel did not advertise, what almost no one outside a small circle of lawyers and accountants knew, was that his name sat at the top of a holding company that controlled office towers, warehouses, apartment buildings, and parcels of land in 9 states. He had started with 1 laundromat, then 2, then a building, then a block. By the time he was 50, he had more money than a man could spend in 3 lifetimes, and by the time he was 60, he had stopped counting, because counting it had started to feel obscene. He gave most of it away. Quietly. There was a foundation. It was named the Eunice Washington Foundation, after his mother, and in 22 years, it had given away $211 million to clinics, to scholarships, to housing, to small struggling churches and food pantries, and after-school programs. Denzel's name was on none of it. Not one building, not one plaque. When people asked him why, he would say the same thing every time. He would say, "My mother never put her name on the things she gave away. Why should I put mine?" His mother. We will come back to her, because she is the whole reason for everything that happened that October. But hold her in your mind for now. A woman named Eunice. Remember the name. Here is the other thing you need to know about Denzel Washington. 5 days before he walked into that little shop on Lorraine Avenue, he had taken a jacket out of a cedar chest at the foot of his bed, a chest he opened maybe once a year, on hard days, and he had decided it was finally time to wear it again. The jacket was old. It was a herringbone wool, charcoal gray, double-stitched, the kind they did not make anymore. It had belonged to his father, a man named Samuel Washington, who had worn it every Sunday of his working life and had been buried in a cheaper one because the family decided to keep the good jacket. Samuel had died poor. He had died at 53, worn down to nothing by a job at a foundry that paid him barely enough to keep the lights on. And the only thing of real value he ever owned was that one good jacket and the dignity he put on with it. Denzel had kept it for 36 years. The lining had finally torn. A button was hanging by a thread. And he had carried it out into the rain that morning to the first dry cleaner he saw, because he could not stand the thought of throwing it away, and because something in him, something he could not name yet, told him to take it to that little place with the faded sign instead of the fancy tailor downtown who knew his face. Now let me tell you about Ruth. Ruth Calloway was 49 years old. She had worked at Mathis Cleaners for 19 years. She made $11.20 an hour pressing, mending and steaming other people's clothes, and on a good week she took home a little over $300 after taxes. She had not always been poor. There had been a time, a good long stretch of years, when Ruth and her husband Tom had a small brick house on the east side with a maple tree in the front yard that turned the color of fire every fall. Tom drove a delivery route. Ruth worked at the Cleaners. They were not rich, but they were fine. They had each other and a porch and a dog named Biscuit, and that was a whole life. Then Tom got sick. It started as a cough in the spring and ended in a hospice bed in the winter, and the 18 months in between took everything. The cancer took Tom. The treatments took the house. There is a number that lives in Ruth's chest, the way a stone lives at the bottom of a river. And the number is $31,218. That is what was left of the medical debt after the insurance ran out, and the house was sold and every account was emptied. $31,218 owed to a hospital and 3 collection agencies, growing a little every month from interest she could not stop. So you understand when I tell you that Ruth Calloway found an envelope of cash and gave it back, what that meant. You understand the weight of it. But there is more, and this is the part Ruth told no one. 6 weeks before that rainy Tuesday, Ruth had come home from a double shift to find a new lock on her apartment door and her things in trash bags in the hallway. The landlord, a man named Del Pruitt, had decided he could get more rent from someone else, and he had used a missed payment, just one, as the reason. There was a process. There were laws. Ruth knew that. But fighting it meant lawyers and time and money, and she had none of the 3. So she packed what she could carry, put the rest in a storage unit she could barely afford, and she did the only thing a proud, exhausted woman with nowhere to go could think to do. She moved into the shop. In the back of Mathis Cleaners, past the rows of plastic-wrapped clothes and the big steam presses, there was a storage closet. It was not much bigger than a bathroom. Ruth had cleared a space and set up an army cot she bought for $11 at a surplus store. She had a hot plate, a small lamp, and a folding chair. She kept it spotless. She kept it smelling of laundry soap and the lavender sachet she made from scraps. Every morning at 5:40 she folded the cot, slid it behind the shelving, and became the presser again before old Earl Mathis came in at 7. He was 78 years old and half blind in one eye, and he never noticed. Or if he did, he was kind enough to pretend he didn't. Ruth slept on a cot in a closet behind the steam presses, and she pressed other people's beautiful clothes all day, and she never once complained, and she never once let for show what it cost her. That is the kind of woman she was now. Let me show you the day the jacket came in. It was the Thursday before, late afternoon, the light going amber through the front window. Ruth was alone at the counter. Earl had gone home early with his back acting up. The little bell over the door rang, and a tall man in a plain wool coat came in out of the cold, carrying something folded over his arm with a care that told her, before he said a word, that whatever it was, it mattered. He set the jacket on the counter as gently as you would set down a sleeping child. "The lining's torn," he said, "and there's a button coming loose. I'd like it repaired, not replaced. The same thread color if you can match it." He paused. "It was my father's." Ruth picked it up. She knew good wool when she felt it, and this was good wool, old and soft and heavy in the hand. She turned it over, found the torn lining, ran her thumb along the seam. She found the button hanging by its last thread. And she looked up at the man, and she saw something in his eyes she recognized, because she carried it too. She saw grief that had learned how to behave in public. "I can match it," she said. "I'll do it by hand. It'll hold better than the machine." "Thank you," the man said. And then, because he was a careful man and he had learned to read people across a counter, he added quietly, "How much?" $12, Ruth said. Ready Tuesday. He paid in cash, took his ticket, and left without another word. Ruth watched him through the front window, watched him stand a moment on the wet sidewalk, looking at nothing, and then walk off into the gray. She did not know his name. She would not know it for 5 more days. That night, after she locked the front door and pulled the security gate down and turned off the front lights, Ruth carried the jacket to her little folding chair in the back, under the single lamp, and she opened her sewing tin. It was an old butter cookie tin, dented, full of spools, and a brass thimble worn smooth, and a paper of needles, and a tin of mismatched buttons she had collected over 19 years. She put on her reading glasses. She threaded a needle. And she opened the torn seam in the lining a little wider, the way you have to do it right. That is when her fingers found the envelope. It was sewn flat into the lining, between the wool and the silk, low along the bottom hem where the weight would not show. Someone had put it there a long time ago and stitched it shut, and over the years the stitches had worn, and the tear that brought the jacket to her had loosened it. Ruth pulled it free. It was a plain paper envelope, soft with age, and it was thick. She opened it under the lamp. Inside was money, old $100 bills, the kind with the small portrait, folded once. She counted them on her knee, slowly, twice, because the first time her hands were shaking too much to trust the number. $9,400. And there was a second thing in the envelope. A square of notebook paper, gone soft as cloth, with 5 words on it in pencil, in a man's careful, blocky hand. The words said, "For the rainy day. Love, Dad." Ruth sat very still in that little closet with $9,400 in her lap. Now I want you to stop with me here, because this is the moment the whole story turns on, and I do not want you to rush past it. $9,400. Ruth owed $2,400 in deposit and first month's rent to get into a small place she had already found, a clean one-room above a bakery, where the landlord did not check too hard and the heat actually worked. $9,400 would have put her in that apartment that week. It would have gotten her off the cot in the closet. It would have bought her months of breathing room. It would have let her sleep, really sleep, for the first time in 6 weeks, in a bed, behind a door that locked from the inside, that no one could change the locks on, and no one would ever have known. The man did not know the money was there. His own father had hidden it. The stitches had hidden it. 40 years had hidden it. It had come to her by accident in the dark, and she could have slid it into her own pocket and stitched the lining shut clean, and handed the jacket back Tuesday with a smile, and there was not a soul on this earth who could have ever proven otherwise. That is what a temptation actually is. It is not a cartoon devil on your shoulder. It is a tired woman alone in a closet at 10:51 at night, with a debt like a stone in her chest and a cot for a bed, holding the exact thing that would change her week, and knowing she could keep it and be safe. Ruth held it for a long time, and then she did something. She set the money on the folding chair, and she picked up the little square of notebook paper instead, and she read it again. For the rainy day. Love, Dad. And Ruth Calloway, who had buried her own father in a county cemetery when she was 22, started to cry. Not for herself. For the man she had never met who had folded those bills and stitched them into his good jacket, against a rainy day that probably came and went 100 times without him ever spending it. Because some men cannot spend their own safety, they can only save it for the people they love. She thought about her own father then. Walter, a man who had worked the loading docks until his hands curled up like old roots. A man who had 2 sayings he repeated his whole life, and one of them came to Ruth now, sitting in that closet, as clear as if he were standing there. Ruthie, he used to say, money can be earned and lost and earned again. But your good name, once you give it up, you don't get it back. Honesty is the one thing the bank can never come and take from you. Don't ever hand it over. Ruth wiped her face with the back of her hand, and the decision was already made. It had been made 19 years ago on a loading dock by a man with curled up hands. It had been made 40 years before that by a poor man stitching his savings into a jacket. It had been made by every quiet, decent person who ever chose to be honest when honesty cost them something. Ruth was just the next in a long line. She put the $9,400 back into the envelope. She put the little pencil note back with it. She finished repairing the jacket the way she had promised, by hand, with thread she dyed a half shade darker on her hot plate to match the lining exactly. She fixed the button so it would never come loose again. And then she did one more thing. She tore a clean strip from her own notebook, and in her neat, careful hand, she wrote a note. It said this: "Sir, I found this sewn into the lining when I opened the seam to do the repair. I counted it, but I did not keep any of it. It belongs to you, not to me. I think it was meant for you a long time ago. I fixed the tear in the button while I was in there, and I'm not charging you for that part, because it didn't feel right to take money from a man for handing back what was already his. The little paper note was in there too. I think you should keep that most of all. Respectfully, R.C." She folded the note around the envelope of money. She tucked it deep into the breast pocket of the finished jacket, where he would find it but a careless person would not. She wrapped the jacket in clear plastic, hung it on the rack with his ticket pinned to it, and she went to bed on her cot $11 poorer than she could afford to be, because she had decided not to charge for the repair. And that, my friend, is where this story would have ended, if the man who came to pick up that jacket had been anybody else. He would have found the money, been surprised, been grateful, maybe left a tip, and walked back out in his wife. And Ruth Calloway would have gone right on sleeping in that closet until the day the shop closed for good. Because Earl Mathis was 78 and the lease was up in the spring, and the closing was coming whether anyone was honest or not. But the man was not anybody else. The man was Denzel Washington. And when he found that note, the small, careful words about handing back what was already his, and the line about not charging a man for his own things, something happened in him that had not happened in 29 years. Let me tell you what happened. Denzel came in to pick up the jacket on that rainy Tuesday morning at 9:40. Ruth was at the counter. Earl was in the back. The bell rang, and Denzel came in, and Ruth recognized him at once, the grief that knew how to behave, and she went to the rack and brought down the plastic-wrapped jacket and laid it on the counter. "All set," she said. "By hand, like you asked. The button won't come loose again." Denzel reached for his wallet. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Ruth said. "It's taken care of. There's a note in the breast pocket. Please read it before you go." Something in her voice made him stop. He peeled back the plastic. He reached into the breast pocket, and his fingers closed around the folded note and the thick envelope inside it. He drew it out. He unfolded Ruth's note first, and he read it, standing there in the gray morning light with the rain ticking against the front window. And Ruth watched the color leave the face of a stranger. His hand went to the envelope. He opened it. He saw the old $100 bills. And then he saw the small square of notebook paper, gone soft as cloth, and he read the 5 words on it, "For the rainy day. Love, Dad." In his own father's blocky pencil hand, a hand he had not seen in 36 years, and Denzel Washington, who had buried 2 parents and built an empire, and sat across the table from senators without blinking, put one hand flat on the worn counter of a little dry cleaner to keep himself standing up. He did not say anything for almost a full minute. Ruth did not rush him. She knew what grief looked like when it found you in public. When he finally spoke, his voice was not steady. "Where?" he said. "Where exactly was this?" "Sewn into the lining," Ruth said gently. "Down along the bottom hem. The stitches had worn out. That's probably what tore. I found it when I opened the seam." She paused. "I think your father put it there for you. I'm sorry it took so long to reach you." Denzel looked up at her then. He really looked at her, the first time he had looked at her face instead of across a counter. He saw a tired woman of about 50 in a faded smock, with chapped hands and reading glasses pushed up into graying hair and kind, exhausted eyes. He saw a brass thimble on a chain around her neck. And he asked her a question that surprised them both. "Why didn't you keep it?" Ruth did not even have to think. "Because it wasn't mine," she said simply, as if that were the whole of it, as if there were nothing else to say. But Denzel could not let it go. There was something he needed to understand. "Most people," he said slowly, "would have at least kept the cash. Nobody would ever have known. The repair you did beautifully. And you wouldn't even charge me for it. Why? And Ruth, who did not know she was talking to one of the wealthiest men in the state, who thought she was just talking to a sad man holding his dead father's jacket, told him the truth. My daddy used to say honesty is the one thing the bank can't come and take from you, she said. He worked the docks his whole life and never had much. But he never owed anybody an apology, and he never had to look away when somebody said his name. That was worth more to him than money, and he made sure it was worth more to me. She shrugged, a small tired motion. I don't have a lot, mister, but I've still got that. And I'm not handing it over for $9,400 or for anything else. Now I need you to understand what those words did to Denzel Washington, because to him they were not just nice with words. They were the words of a ghost, his mother, Eunice. I remember her. When Denzel was a boy, his mother had worked at a laundry on the east side, pressing and mending clothes for pennies, the same work Ruth was doing now in this very shop. And Eunice Washington had a habit that drove the laundry's owner half crazy. When a poor customer came in, a struggling mother, an old man in a threadbare coat, Eunice would mend their clothes for free and never tell them. She would just slip the work in, fix the lining, replace the button, take no charge, and tuck a little folded note into the pocket, signed with her initials, E.W. The notes never said much. Fix the hem, no charge. Stay warm. Things like that. Young Denzel to offisko as her orkai. They were poor too. They needed the pennies as much as anybody. And his mother would say, baby, when you do a kindness, you don't sign your whole name to it and stand around waiting to be thanked. You sign it small and you let it go, and you trust it to do its work without you watching. The good you do quiet is the only good that's really yours. Eunice Washington died when Denzel was 32, before the money, before any of it. And on the last night of her life, in a hospital bed she had been moved to from a hallway, she had held her son's hand and made him promise her one thing. You're going to do well, baby, she had said. I can feel it. You've got it in you. But money's going to find you, and money changes a man if he lets it, so promise me. When you've got it, you find the ones who still do it the old way, the quiet way, the ones who do right when nobody's looking and don't ask for a thing. You find them, Denzel, and you lift them up. Because nobody ever lifted us. Promise me. And he had promised. For 29 years, Denzel Washington had kept that promise the way you keep a promise you do not quite know how to keep. He had given away $211 million. He had funded clinics and scholarships and put thousands of strangers through college, and never once put his name on any of it. He had done so much good, quietly, that you would think the promise was more than kept. But standing in that little shop, holding his father's hidden savings in one hand and Ruth's note in the other, Denzel realized something that shook him to the floor. He had been doing the good. But he had stopped looking for the people. He had been writing checks to organizations and letting committees pick the names. He had not, in years, stood in front of an actual living person who did right when nobody was looking, and seen them with his own eyes the way his mother meant. And here she was, a woman pressing clothes for $11.20 an hour, who found $9,400 in the dark and gave it back, and refuses to charge $12 for the work, and tucked a small note into the pocket signed with her initials, R. C. Exactly the way his mother used to sign hers, E.W., and did not stand around waiting to be thanked. Denzel Washington put the envelope and both notes carefully into his coat. He looked at Ruth Calloway for a long moment, and then, in a voice that he kept very level because he did not trust it otherwise, he said, "Thank you. You have no idea what you've given back to me today. It is so much more than money." He paused. "I'm going to think about how to thank you properly. May I come back?" "You don't owe me a thing, mister," Ruth said. "Honest." "I know," Denzel said. "That's exactly why I'm coming back." And he left. But he did not go home. Here is the part of the story Ruth did not see. Here is what a quiet, observant man does when his mother's voice has just reached him from across 30 years. Denzel walked half a block in the rain and sat down in his 11-year-old sedan, and he did not start the engine. He sat there. He looked at his father's note again. And then he made a phone call to a woman named Loretta Hayes, who had been his assistant and his right hand for 20 years, and was about the only person who knew the full size of what he was. "Loretta," he said, "I need you to find out everything you can about a woman. Quietly. Her name is on the ticket. Ruth Calloway. She works at Mathis Cleaners on Lorraine. I don't want anything done to her or for her yet. I just want to understand her life, where she lives, what she's carrying. This one matters." And then, instead of driving away, Denzel did something a man like him almost never does. He waited. He moved his car down the block where he could see the front of the shop, and he watched. He watched all that gray afternoon. He watched Ruth through the front window, pressing, steaming, carrying clothes, smiling at customers, handing an old man his shirts and waving away the coins he tried to leave. He watched Earl Mathis lock up at 6 and shuffle off to a bus stop, and he watched at 6:10 as the front lights went off and the gate came down. But Ruth did not come out. Denzel waited. 15 minutes. 30, an hour. The shop stayed dark and Ruth Calloway did not come out, and a cold understanding began to creep up the back of his neck. He got out of his car and he walked around to the alley behind the row of shops, the way you do when something is wrong and you have to know. And there, in the back window of Mathis Cleaners, behind the bars, he saw a single faint light. A small lamp. And in its glow, the silhouette of a woman unfolding an army cot in a storage closet, the size of a bathroom, behind the steam presses. Denzel Washington stood in a wet alley in Cleveland at 7:30 on a Tuesday night and watched a woman who had handed back $9,400 get ready to sleep on a cot in a closet, because she had nowhere else in the world to go. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. His mother had taught him better than that. You do not humiliate a person by catching them in their hardest hour. You see it, you carry it, and you do something about it without ever letting them feel small. He went home. And he did not sleep that night either. Over the next 2 days, Loretta Hayes brought him the whole picture, gently and completely, the way she did everything. She brought him the medical debt, $31,218, and the name of the hospital and the 3 collection agencies. She brought him the death certificate of a man named Thomas Calloway, age 51, and the record of a small brick house on the east side that had sold in a hardship sale 18 months ago for far less than it was worth. She brought him the eviction. She brought him the new lock and the landlord, Del Pruitt, and the trash bags in the hallway. She brought him the storage unit and the cot and the $11 surplus store receipt that Ruth had paid with quarters. And then Loretta, who was not a woman who cried easily, set the last page down on Denzel's desk and said, "There's one more thing. I found out where her husband worked. Thomas Calloway drove a delivery route for 19 years. You want to know who held the route contract for the last 6 of those years?" "Tell me," Denzel said. "You did," Loretta said. "One of your logistics companies. He drove for you, Denzel. He worked for your company until the year he got sick. That man wore out his back for 6 years carrying boxes for a company you own. And when he died, his wife lost everything, and she's been sleeping in a closet a mile from one of your office towers, and you never knew her name." The room was very quiet. Denzel Washington sat with that for a long time. He thought about all the money he had given away, the $211 million, the buildings, the scholarships, all of it good, all of it real. And he thought about how a man could give away a fortune to strangers chosen by a committee, and never once notice that a woman who had earned every bit of his help with her own broken back was washing clothes for $11.20 an hour, a mile from his door. His mother's voice came to him again. "You find the ones who do right when nobody's looking. You find them and you lift them up. Because nobody ever lifted us. I found her, Mama," he said quietly, to no one. "It just took me 30 years to learn how to look." And then Denzel Washington stopped grieving and started working. And when a man like that decides to do something, it gets done. Now, let me bring you to the day it all came together. The following Tuesday. 1 week to the day after Ruth handed back the money. It was raining again, the same slow gray rain, as if the city wanted everything to rhyme. Ruth was at the counter in the late morning when the bell rang, and Denzel Washington came in the same plain wool coat, and behind him came a second person, A calm, well-dressed woman with a leather folder under her arm. That was Loretta. "Mister," Ruth said, surprised, "I told you you don't owe me anything." "I know," Denzel said. "I came to tell you the truth. Will you sit with me for a few minutes? Is Earl here? I'd like him to hear it too." Earl shuffled out from the back, and the four of them stood near the counter in that little shop, and Denzel Washington told Ruth Calloway who he was. He told her his name, his real name, the whole weight of it. He told her about the buildings and the foundation and the $211 million given away in his mother's name. He watched Ruth's face go from confusion to disbelief to something close to fear. The way a person looks when the floor of their understanding shifts. And he kept his voice gentle the whole way through. "I tell you all of that," he said, "not to impress you. I tell you so you'll understand that nothing I'm about to do is going to cost me anything I'll miss. I need you to hear that because I know you, Ruth. I've only known you a week, but I know you. You're the kind of woman who won't take a thing unless she's sure it isn't a burden. So hear me. It is not a burden. It is the smallest thing in the world to me. And it is the most important thing I've done with this money in years." Then he did the hard part. He told her as carefully as he could that he knew. He knew about Tom. He knew about the house, and the debt, and the eviction, and the cot in the closet. He saw her flinch, saw the shame rise up in her face, and he stepped in front of it the way you step in front of a falling thing. "Don't," he said softly. "Don't you do that. There is nothing in what I just said for you to be ashamed of. Not one thing. You buried your husband what you could, and you kept your job, and you kept yourself clean and decent in a closet behind a steam press, and you found $9,400 in the dark, and you gave it back. Ruth, there is no shame anywhere in that story. There is only one person in this room who ought to be ashamed, and it's me, for not finding you sooner." And then he told her why. He told her about his mother, Eunice, and the laundry, and the clothes she mended for free, and the little notes she tucked into pockets signed E.W., and the promise he made her in a hospital bed about finding the ones who do right when nobody is looking. He took out Ruth's own note, the one she had written him, and he held it up next to nothing because he did not need to. The initials were enough. R.C., the same small, signing it quiet kindness, 30 years and a whole lifetime apart. "When I read your note," Denzel said, and now his voice did break, just a little, "I heard my mother. I have spent 29 years and a fortune trying to keep a promise to her, and I had started doing it with my checkbook instead of my eyes. You reminded me how she meant for it to be done. You gave that back to me, the same week you gave me back my father's last gift, so, before I do anything else, I need you to understand. You are not the one being helped here, Ruth. You're the one who helped me. Everything that comes after this is just me trying to keep up with you." Ruth Calloway was crying now, openly, the way she had not let herself cry in front of a customer in 19 years. She started. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Denzel said. "You just have to let me. Can you do that? Can you let somebody do something good for you, the way you've spent your whole life doing it for everybody else? That's the only hard part. The rest is easy." And Ruth, after a long moment, gave a small broken nod. And that nod was the bravest thing she did in the whole story. Because for a proud person, the very hardest thing in the world is to let yourself be seen, and helped, and loved. So let me tell you what Denzel Washington did. He did not just write her a check. He had learned, a long time ago, that a check is a one-time thing, and what people in Ruth's position need is not a moment, but a life. So Loretta opened the leather folder, and one piece at a time, Denzel laid it out. The medical debt, $31,218, was gone. Not deferred, not negotiated. Paid in full, all of it, the hospital and all 3 collection agencies, the paperwork already signed. Ruth would never get another one of those letters again, as long as she lived. The eviction was being challenged by his lawyers at no cost to her. And the landlord, Del Pruitt, who it turned out had done the same illegal thing to 4 other tenants, was about to have a very educational year. But Ruth would not be going back to that building anyway, because there was the clean little place above the bakery she had already found. The one with the heat that worked, and the deposit and a full year of rent were paid. And the keys? real keys, to a door that locked from the inside and that no one could ever change the locks on, were in an envelope in Loretta's folder with Ruth's name on it. But Denzel was not finished, and here is the part that mattered most, because this is the part that was not charity. This is the part that was a future. Earl Mathis was 78 years old, and the lease on the shop was up in the spring, and he had been quietly dreading the day he had to tell Ruth the place was closing. Denzel had found that out too. So he had bought the building, not to close it, to save it. He sat old Earl down and offered to buy the business itself for a fair price, enough for Earl to retire in comfort for the first time in his life. And Earl, who loved Ruth like a daughter, agreed on one condition, which was exactly the condition Denzel was hoping for. "The shop is yours now, Ruth," Denzel said. "Not as a gift, as a job and a future and your name on the sign. There's money set aside to fix the place up, new presses, a real workroom, and a proper tailoring station, because Loretta tells me you've got hands like a master, and you've been wasting them pressing other people's wrinkles. We're going to put your name where Earl's used to be, Calloway. And there's a fund attached to it, so that you can do for this neighborhood what my mother did for hers. Mend for the ones who can't pay. Tuck a note in the pocket, sign it small, let it go. The way it's supposed to be done." Ruth Calloway stood in the middle of the little shop she had slept in the back of for 6 weeks, holding the keys to her own apartment in one hand and the keys to her own business in the other, and she could not speak at all. So Denzel said the last thing, the quietest thing, the thing he had really come to say. "My mother used to tell me that the good you do quiet is the only good that's really yours. You've done so much good quiet, Ruth, for so long that you forgot anybody might be watching. But somebody was. My father, who hid that money for a rainy day he never got to use. My mother, who taught a habit to a son who almost forgot it. And me, who got to be the one standing across the counter the day you proved them both right." He took her hand. "You were never invisible. You just hadn't been found yet. Let me tell you how it ended. Not the way fairy tales end, all at once and forever, but the way real things end, slowly and then for good." Ruth moved into the place above the bakery that week. The first night she slept in a real bed behind a door that locked. She slept 11 hours and woke up not knowing where she was. And then she remembered and she cried again, the good kind this time. The shop reopened in the spring as Calloway Cleaners and Tailoring, with new presses and a workroom in the back where the storage closet used to be. And Ruth tore out the shelving in the cot with her own hands and put in a long bright table and good light. And she stood there sometimes in the mornings before anyone came in, just looking at it. She kept Earl's old chair by the window. Earl came by every Friday for coffee until the day he passed 2 years later, and he died knowing the place he had given 40 years to was in the best hands it had ever been in. And Ruth did the thing Denzel asked. She mended for the ones who could not pay. A young mother's coat with a busted zipper, no charge, a note in the pocket. An old man's only suit, taken in for free so it would not hang off him like a sail, a note in the pocket. A teenager's interview shirt pressed perfect and quietly returned with the tag still saying paid, and a note in the pocket. She signed every one of them small, RC, and she let them go, and she did not stand around waiting to be thanked. And somewhere a woman named Eunice Washington, who had been gone for almost 30 years, was, I have to believe, very proud. Denzel Washington kept coming in, not as a benefactor, as a regular. He brought his shirts. He sat in Earl's old chair by the window with a cup of coffee and read his paper while Ruth worked, 2 quiet people who had each given the other back something they had lost. He never put his name on the shop. He never told the neighborhood what he had done. The good he did quiet stayed quiet, the way his mother taught him. And the herringbone jacket, his father's jacket, with the lining Ruth had repaired by hand so it would never tear again, hung in Denzel's closet next to the 4 plain suits. And he wore it now, more often than he used to, because a woman who slept on a cot in a closet had reminded him what it was for. Not for show, for dignity, for putting on a little of your father's worth when the day is hard. So here is what this story leaves us with. 3 things, I think. The first is that you never know who you are standing across the counter from. The tired man holding his father's coat might be worth more than your whole street. And the tired woman pressing his shirt might be worth more than all of it put together. And the only way you will ever find out is by treating both of them like they matter, before you have any idea whether they can do anything for you. Because the truth is, the way you treat people when you think they can do nothing for you is the truest thing about you there is. The second is that being honest when no one is watching is not a small thing. It is the whole thing. Ruth Calloway changed her entire life with a decision she made alone in a dark closet at 10:51 at night. A decision she was certain no one would ever know about. She was wrong about that. Somebody always knows. At the very least, you do. And the person you have to live with every single day, for the rest of your life, is you. And the third is the one Eunice Washington spent her whole life trying to teach. The kindest thing you can do for a struggling person is not to pity them. It is to see them. To notice the dignity they are holding onto with both hands, and to honor it, and to lift them up in a way that lets them keep it. Denzel did not rescue Ruth. He saw her. And then he got out of the way and let her become what she had always been, which was a master with kind hands and an honest name, finally given the room to be it. So let me leave you the way I always do, by asking you something. Has there ever been a moment in your life when you could have kept something that wasn't yours, and you gave it back, and nobody ever knew but you? Or has there ever been a stranger who saw you, really saw you, on a day you felt invisible, and changed everything without asking for a thing in return? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. I want to hear your story. If this story reminded you that healing is quiet, and that being seen can save a life, share it with someone who is carrying something heavy today. Every person you pass may be slowly finding their way back, one small task at a time. And sometimes the kindest people are the ones who notice us long before we notice them. Ask for nothing, and change everything. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one someone needs to hear. We'll see you then. Before you go, one honest word from me to you. This story is a work of fiction. Ruth Calloway, Earl Mathis, the shop on Lorraine Avenue, and every event in it came out of my imagination and are not real. The benefactor in this story carries the name Denzel Washington as a storytelling choice for this channel, and he is a fictional character. He is not meant to be, and should not be taken as, the real person who shares that name or any real individual living or dead. Any resemblance is entirely coincidental and unintended. And here is why this one stayed with me while I was writing it. I keep coming back to that moment in the dark, the cot, the lamp, the $9,400 in her lap, and nobody in the whole world watching. I think most of us will face a version of that closet at some point. A quiet moment where doing the right thing costs us something real, and nobody would ever know if we didn't. I wanted to write a story where the person did right anyway and was found, because I have to believe that more of them are found than we ever hear about. Thank you for sitting in that closet with Ruth for a little while. I hope it stays with you the way it stayed with me.